Hey guys, Matt Baker, the co-founder of the HMO platform here, and I am joined by a bit of an expert in co-living today. This is Connor Moore, who has been around co-living for a long period of time, and we thought we'd get together and have a bit of a chat and a bit of a chinwag about what co-living is to us, some of the challenges that we see around co-living. Obviously, we at HMO platform are based in the UK. We have UK-based properties. HMOs and co-living. Connor has basically seen, co-living all around the world. So I'm very excited to dig into what that looks like and find out a bit more about that. And Connor, where are you at the moment?
Yes, so actually calling in from New York, and yeah, thanks a ton, Matt, for having me on the show here. Pretty excited to see where we go. I know whenever we have any discussions about co-living, they're always a lot of fun and fruitful. So looking forward to it.
Excellent. Yeah. So why don't we just start by doing a bit of background. So how did you get into co-living? What was it about co-living that really attracted it as something you wanted to really dive into?
Yeah, great question. So I guess it kind of goes back to when I graduated undergrad. This was in 2015, about 5 years ago. I went and lived and worked abroad for about a year, which was absolutely phenomenal. I went down to New Zealand and Australia, and I was working random jobs there on the work and holiday visa. It was a lot of fun, but when I was there, I was staying at what I would call like a long-term hostel. It was actually in Christchurch, New Zealand, and there was around 30 of us. We were all on the work and holiday visa. There were folks from the UK, Canada, US, really all over, and we would all kind of come back from work, and we'd all have this shared kitchen, and we'd make dinner together and hang out and go on weekend trips. And after about like a month or so of living there, I was kind of thinking like, why can't we just always live like this? And so I think then I kind of looked it up and was like, oh, shared living, co-living. And so it had always been in the back of my mind, I guess, for the past 5 years or so. But I really got to dive into the industry last summer. So I actually just finished up business school this year over in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, at the Asia School of Business. It was a ton of fun getting my MBA over there. Wow. But during the summer, we had a 3-month period where you can go get an internship, and so a lot of folks will go and get an internship at a bigger company. But I did the like school has this program called the entrepreneurship track, and so basically I was able to get a research grant and just explore the world of co-living for 3 months. So I went to a co-living conference hosted by Common up here in New York City, actually, and then had the chance to go to San Diego. Los Angeles, San Francisco, interview a ton of different co-living company founders and residents, and just really, and actually live at some of the places, right, which was amazing. And then after that, to kind of see what the Southeast Asian version of co-living was, I had to go to Bali for 6 weeks. As you can imagine,
that sounds like a horrendous thing to have to do.
It was horrible. Yeah, like to have to go surfing some days. But I was living in some co-living places there, and obviously it was absolute paradise. But it was a lot of fun, I guess, to kind of see what the different executions of co-living are, right? So when if you're in New York, and maybe you're more likely to sign a 12-month lease versus Bali, which is more the kind of digital nomad, very transient, kind of populations. But after that summer, I was like, okay, I'm sold. 2 thumbs up on co-living. This is the industry that I want to go into. And so then after graduating this past year, obviously was not the world all of us 2020 grads thought we'd be graduating into. But yeah, so it's been a bit of a roller coaster. But yeah, so since then I've really dove into a few different organizations, one of which is called Co-Live. So it's a global nonprofit. It's kind of the biggest network of co-living professionals around the world. And then as well, I've started working for Nomos Group, which is a real estate investment company here, but it's specifically looking at advising and then raising money for co-living buildings here in the US. So it's a long-winded answer of kind of how I got into co-living, but absolutely love it, and really excited to see where the industry is going to go here in the next 5 to 10 years.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I have a similar background. Even though I didn't realize it was co-living, I went traveling after my university days back in 2007, 2008.
Nice.
So I was in Australia, New Zealand, Christchurch, in fact. What was the name of the hostel you were in? Not like I can
I was
remember
like,
where I stayed.
I think it was called like Global Backpackers, I believe.
Yeah, I can't even remember. I'd have to go
Yeah,
back and
anyhow.
really. I don't even know what email address I used to book that type of stuff. But yeah, so yeah, I'd never really thought about the fact that I was living for about 18 months in co-living situations. So in hostels and yeah, going out to work, coming back. And I think I stayed in some apartments and got, rented some places, rooms in other people's houses for 2 or 3 months at a time occasionally. But yeah, on the whole, it was a shared living environment. And yeah, I imagine as community is a big thing in my life, that obviously makes a lot of sense. Um, and it's interesting that there's Bali seems to be quite a big place that people talk about for co-living, and Bali's where we go on our business retreats as
There
well.
you go.
So I've been every year for the last 3 years on the trot,
Oh,
apart from
that's
this
so
year,
tough.
obviously,
Right, right.
which is also not so tough. So yeah, so we go to Canggu and hang out there for about a couple of weeks every October time. So should be there right now, or just
Yeah.
on the way back, which is a bit of a shame.
Next year, next year.
Next year with the baby.
There you go. There you go. Absolutely. Exciting times.
Exciting times indeed. So yeah, so I can see you've got a lot of experience. How many different countries have you experienced co-living in? Have you traveled and seen quite a few?
Yes, yes, I have. Numbers, but yeah, not totally sure. But yeah, so like this past summer, and then as well, kind of throughout the year. Part of our business school is that we get to travel around a good amount
Yeah,
in Southeast Asia. So I actually got to see co-living right in Indonesia, in Malaysia, Singapore, Korea. Got to go to a few in Hong Kong, which was great. Thailand, in
yeah,
Chiang Mai.
yeah.
Um, but yeah. So definitely seen it, I guess, in a lot of different countries over in Southeast Asia, and then obviously I've seen a decent amount here in the U.S. Haven't done the full like European co-living tour quite yet, but definitely want to get over there at some point and go and check out all the operators over there because I know they're popping up left and right, is what it seems like.
Sounds like that's on your 2021 to-do list.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, hopefully we will. We'll see if I can make it over. Yeah, but hopefully the travel will become a thing again here shortly.
Yeah, well, exactly. So yeah, all over the place. Yeah, so that's interesting. How do you see co-living differing in those environments? So, in the whole of Asia or Southeast Asia when you were traveling around, were they always the shorter stay type accommodation, or was there a combination? And is the US always a longer stay? How does that translate?
Yeah. So I guess it varies a good amount, like going from country to country for sure. And it's actually been really cool to see that basically all at the same time, these different countries and different continents have started developing this kind of shared living model, right? And I don't think that it's just a coincidence. I think the way we live in the 21st century is way different than we used to live, right? And so with that in mind, we do need new living models. And so I think it's been really cool to see all these different countries and all these different co-living companies start to test out all of these different models, right? The ones in Bali that I mentioned, and then in Chiang Mai as well. They seem to be the two kind of hotspots for digital nomads, right? And so there it was like,
Chiang Mai is also good for cooking. I did my
oh
cooking
yeah,
course there. Yeah.
very nice. Yeah, no, I mean, Thai food might be my one of my favorite kinds of food. It's absolutely phenomenal. but but yeah, and so a lot of the ones there that are more the transient populations, they're the folks that might come in for a month or 3 months or whatever it is. Almost all of those ones actually like on the first floor or maybe on the roof actually overlooking the Bali rice fields and
Yeah.
whatever it is. They would have a co-working space, right? And so which obviously makes sense, right? It's like, okay, if we're catering towards these folks that maybe they work as a digital marketing or they work as a website designer, and they don't need to be in any specific location, what they're going to need out of their living situation is great Wi-Fi, good place to work, kind of a potentially network of friends or other kind of office amenities that they wouldn't have access to otherwise, right? And so you look at like that kind of model, and then you look at like some of the operators here in the U.S. And I guess like there are some longer term co-living options, in Bali. There are shorter term ones in the US or Europe or
Mm-hmm.
kind of all over, right? Having said that, I think like looking at the more permanent ones in Hong Kong and Singapore, there was a few different operators. Weave was one that I saw in Hong Kong, Hamlet, Common Town. There's a few other. Life is another one. Those three I was able to see in Singapore, and those the ones that you see that pop up in the big cities. So whether it's New York or San Francisco or Seoul or Bangalore or whatever, right? Those ones tend to be a bit more permanent because I think you do have folks that are there that are working in these big, kind of central like tech or finance hubs or whatever it is. But a lot of the ones I saw in Singapore and Hong Kong were like 95% expats, right? So there
Right.
wasn't a ton of locals. But then when I was in India, it was almost all locals. So it's really interesting to kind of see how they all differ. And then I think in New York and in California, the ones that I saw, they were probably it was a good mix of maybe like mostly locals, but probably people that just got to New York or just got to San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like we could probably go on for days and days about it, right? But I wanted to ask you as well, kind of looking at, because I know that you've, been in co-living for quite some time now. And I think kind of looking at the kind of HMO shared living model and how the lines for sure intersect there with co-living as well. What have you found, I guess, with the HMO platform in the UK? Is it more expats? Is it locals? Is it a mix of kind of everybody, or what does that kind of look like?
Well, it's interesting because in my head, I'm seeing how there's an evolution of two types of living. So you've got this nomadic style of living that's developed probably more overseas for that digital nomad, and you've also got especially in the UK, the old style of HMO living, shared living, where you've got your kind of your beige or vanilla HMO. So your beige box, should I say, which is kind of not well thought through. It's where the investor, the owner of the properties, just thought, well, how can I maximize this? Let's just divide it up into bedrooms and put as many people in as possible. So without any thought to who's going in there, they're thinking, right, this is, how can I get the most out of the asset that I've just bought or that I own? And the evolution of that has come to starting to cross over with this kind of way of living in this digital nomad way, where you've got really nicely designed properties that have got the facilities that you might need, those co-working spaces, etc. And then you've got this kind of vanilla beige box HMO, which has got kind of nothing apart from a bed, and gradually one's evolving into a longer stay. Maybe this is evolving slightly shorter stays, and then you're kind of crossing over in the middle, where you then got this kind of evolution of what I think is probably co-living into the 2020s, of really well-designed properties that have great space within them, great facilities, and then great service, which are the three cornerstones of what I would call co-living: space, design, and service, to give that great customer experience, to deliver on the community, which is the promise that co-living kind of offers. So in the UK, the evolution really is that the tenants are getting fussier. So in the UK, obviously, share housing has been around for quite a while, and traditionally it was for people that maybe couldn't afford individual living, so they couldn't afford the flats, and wasn't really a choice. It was more of something they had to be resigned to. So I have to move into this HMO because I can't afford the flat, or because I haven't got the best credit score over here and I haven't done this. And landlords are maybe a bit more, a bit less fussy about who goes in them. And in terms of the nationality of people, I think there's a big variety. When I first started this in 2015, 2016, as a landlord, our first HMO tenants were all Eastern European. And then we had Brexit votes and all sorts of things, weird things happening in UK politics, which meant that there was a bit of a change in demographics. But when I see the list of tenants that we've got, there's a huge variety, from from European workers, Eastern European workers, kind of it's from Asia as well. There's just a huge variety, and I think it reflects the global nature of kind of the workforce and the world that we're in at the moment, and especially what the pandemic's brought is a kind of a opening of the eyes to the fact that we are in a global workforce, and it's probably a big positive to those digital nomads who are working all over the world, because actually people have been more open to working outside their little bubble in their little town. So again, I think that what we're going to see is co-living in the UK going the way of how it has evolved in New York, the States, how it is in those Southeast Asian countries, to being something which maybe people see as a short-term solution, but actually end up being a long-term solution, because co-living actually attracts, from my view, from what we see, longer-term tenants. So they stay for well over a year. Our longest tenancy is now over 3 years. What's that? There's one person in the same room.
That's awesome.
Which is great. And as an investor and developer, that's exactly what we want. We want tenants who stay and who don't give us any grief and that pay. That's exactly what we want. And we want them to have a great time while they're living in the properties. And I think traditionally landlords haven't really cared about the experience they have, and they haven't really put the customer first. And as you know, we always talk about the HMO platform putting the tenant first, which is essentially putting the customer first, like you do in any other business. I don't know why you would never even think about that. As long as you think about who your customer is going to be, putting your tenant first is gonna pay dividends. So, and in co-living, it looks like doing that is just so important. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, I think as well, one of the things you mentioned, the kind of this novel idea of putting the customer first, right? It's kind of like, wait a minute, this has literally happened in like pick an industry, right? It's kind of like, okay, there's been so much, innovation, I guess, especially, since the year 2000, if we look at, smartphones, social media, like, and then in all of these, kind of products out there are customer centric, right? If you look at, okay, how can we make the taxi ride experience better? Boom, there's these rideshare apps that pop up all over the world, right? And so I think it's kind of crazy that where we live, which is, probably the vast majority of our time, right, is kind of spent either in the office or at work, and then where you live, right? And it's crazy that like where we live and where we spend so many hours, like hasn't seen a ton of innovation, right? Like you were just mentioning the kind of the typical tenant landlord relationship is, here are the keys, make sure to pay me every month, don't break anything, and like that's the extent of the relationship, right? And it's like that is obviously I think when you start to see consumers that are demanding great customer centric products in a lot of different other industries, it is about time that real estate catches up. And I think that if you look at offices, for example, like I think where we spend the most of our time, right? So like offices or our place of work, and then living at home, right? You look at a lot of the companies in Silicon Valley, right? So they're supposed to be, if you look at Google's office, or Apple has this like spaceship circle. I don't even know what it is, but it just, they all look fantastic, right? And it's like, I was in an office the other day in Kuala Lumpur. It's this company called AirAsia. It's an airline over there. And we got to go to their headquarters, and they have this like 3-story slide that goes from the 3rd floor, and you can get in the slide and go all the way down to the cafeteria on the 1st floor. And I was like, this is amazing stuff, right? It's like, how often do people use the slide? I think if I was there, I'd probably use it every day. But
I'm just making a note for our next development.
Exactly. Slide.
It's going down here. Yeah, slide.
Tenants love the slides, right? So no, but yeah, and so I think like we've seen all this innovation in office spaces, right? And we're starting to see more and more of it saying, okay, if this business has a goal, right? Google has a goal to make sure that, it's able to have its employees come in and work, in a great team environment, like attract and retain top talent, and having these amazing offices is a part of that, right?
Well,
And
they
so,
want to keep employees on site as much as possible because
well,
then
that's
they're more productive. So they can provide all the food, all the drink, the after the beers, the
stay at work.
just to stay at work. And so people are waking up in the morning and saying, actually, I much prefer to get to work at 6 o'clock because they've got the gym, they've got breakfast, I can
Free
have a chat,
breakfast.
and all of that. And so they're staying late for after. Yeah, so Google are getting a lot of bang for their buck with their employees by creating these environments to work in. And I've
Absolutely.
been to the Google office in London, and it was amazing. It was a conversation with an investor, and they took us, they treated us to lunch on Google.
Sure. Amazing. Amazing. But yeah, and I think like just that the like general mindset, right, of saying, hey, how can we design a living experience that will better achieve the goals of what we want, right? So if that's having great service, a great design space, and like a fantastic community, then we need to start bringing that mindset. We need more folks like yourself, kind of saying, okay, how can we put the tenant first in this model, and how can we really think about redesigning every single stage of the process to better achieve the goals of living. That's kind of a bizarre phrase, but I think if we start thinking like that more, and a lot of people are all over the world, I think we're going to come up with some really cool, innovative models that, of course, have the customer experience right at the core of the business model. So
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, I think with co-living, one of the biggest things which is at the core, which actually makes co-living, it is the community we talked about. So how have you seen community being built and created within different co-living spaces, different co-living operators? Is there a key theme that makes the community work well?
yeah, it's a really good question. And I would love to hear your thoughts as well, Matt, after this. So I know
Yeah.
we could probably take this one question and, I don't know, run maybe about 24 hours on it. But yeah. So it's been really interesting, I guess, kind of seeing all the different executions of community, right? Because when it comes down to it, if you're living in New York or London for 12 months and you're there permanently, and you like have a job there and you go in every day and you come back, whatever, and maybe you have an existing community of friends there, that's going to be way different kind of community execution playbook, if you will, than the digital nomad spots in Thailand or Bali, right? I think when it comes down to it, like it is like co-living is super cool because, and I know we've mentioned this before, but kind of saying that the customer, the tenant, the member, the resident is also a core part of your product, right? Because
Yeah.
you are offering this community. And so it's been fascinating, I guess, to see how the different co-living operators have tried to execute it. I think the ones that are most successful, that are able to get what's called like organic community, right? So it's not just the operator saying, hey, every Tuesday we're going to have this event, and then Friday we're going to have a happy hour, and then we're going to have a movie night Saturday. It's kind of like, that can go a long way and like having people meet each other. But what you want it to be natural. You want it to be, people making WhatsApp groups, right? That are all runners that are in this co-living community, and they say, hey, we're going to go, like running every, Tuesday or Wednesday morning. And so I think what you want is kind of bottom up community as well as top down. So top down is kind of thinking, I'm an operator, I'm going to build this amazing place and I'm going to have these like weekly events. But what you also want is your residents organically, meeting one another,
Yeah.
kind of planning their own events, right? And so that's obviously when you get to a point where someone is like, why would I leave? Right? Because they've made some amazing friends. It's all, pretty organic as far as I'm spending time with these folks because I choose to, not because there's just these, kind of events every
Yeah.
once in a while that's like thrown by the company. So obviously you do want the bottom up. Having said that, it is hard. I think when you look at a lot of other, kind of companies out there, they've been looking at, oh, okay, how can we use artificial intelligence to like match people to better roommates and all this kind of stuff. Maybe we'll get there at some point, which is exciting. But I think when it comes down to it, like humans are so different. Like you can't just, like have someone's resume and like what they're interested in and then know if they're going to be a good roommate with somebody, right? It's a long process. It's relationship forming, it's
Yeah.
trust building. And so I think actually building a strong organic community is difficult. But from an operator's perspective, there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of set it in motion, right? Like you don't want to, a lot of co-living companies use the term community manager, but there's a lot of folks at Co-Live and some other organizations that I've spoken with to where they like to use the term community facilitator. So instead of managing a community, you're facilitating it, right? But yeah, so would love to kind of hear, like, again, I've just like read about it. I've like lived in these places, but I've never actually operated a co-living company, right? And so I think as far as, you know, what has your experience been like as far as trying to facilitate a robust, strong community?
Well, as the investor and developer, we're not always involved in the day-to-day. And in fact, managing community is something which we are now growing into as a model, as a business. And in 2021, we're launching a kind of the nation's first, the UK's first national co-living operator. And these are challenges that we are learning from our existing experiences through having properties and working with others. There's a group of us that have got experience in managing and owning co-living properties, and the best things that we've seen working are in nudging tenants towards making decisions. So not having constant kind of events. So I think regular events is important, something which is put on centrally, but actually empowering members, housemates, tenants to put on events themselves. So, and maybe instead of saying, well, we're going to put on an event and it's going to cost us as the owner 100 quid or 200 quid to put on an event, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, here's a pot of money, why don't you go and put on an event yourself?
That's
and
awesome.
We will sponsor, or we will support your event. So throw us your ideas, and then go and do it. So as you say, empowering them, so nudging them to make small changes and just making a suggestion that they attend, or a suggestion that they do something. And if you do that with all the members of the community, with that kind of community facilitation, and regular touch points, then what you're doing is you're constantly, you always want it to be their idea.
Right.
So it's like
Inception almost, right? So
yeah, no, exactly. So you want them to think they've come up with it themselves. So that is your end goal. That's your organic community. Where they are doing it, and you can facilitate that. And I think the most important part of community is when new people come in. So obviously there's it's a bit like getting momentum. So you've got to start a community somehow. So that's the nudging. It's our job at the moment is to engender community in properties where they've not necessarily been sold that they're moving into a community, that they've been sold, they're moving into a room in a very nice looking property. So now we're going around and saying, well, we've got these community events going on, and it has worked really well. We have done it over the last 3 years, just not in a very formal way. It's always been informal. Some of you like everything. You have a good idea, like, I'll just do that, and we don't do it in a formal way. But every 3 to 6 months we would take a whole bunch of houses in one area and put some money behind a bar, and we say, here you go, go and have some drinks.
That's awesome.
Some drinks on us, and that works really well because for example, one time we had 2 houses that became really good friends. So they would have get-togethers, and in fact a couple of tenants switched houses because of it. And I think that's the beauty of building community, because people can then start to find who they like, who they get on with. And I think if you facilitate it well, that's when people start to stay, and they stay a long time. And because the tenants community, like the community within the houses, is so important to, well, it becomes more important to the housemates in the property. When somebody new comes in, I think it's really important that the existing members of the community have a say in that. So historically in the UK, it's you put an ad on a website like spareroom.co.uk, and you say, we've got a room available in this house coming up in 2 or 3 weeks. and you just take people around, you do a viewing. If one of the other members of the house was there, they'd say hi, maybe have a little chat. If they're not, then doesn't matter. They're just looking at the room, they're looking at the space, they're looking at how tidy it is, how clean it is, and whether it suits them as an individual. But they're not really looking at the community.
Right.
And our new business, the community, the kind of co-living operation business, that's called Co-Home, and that is designed to be three facets of the community, the home, and me, so the individual. Not that we're calling our people co-homies, but
I kind of like I do like the ring of that. So there you go, co-homies.
Co-homies, yeah. But I think historically people have only looked at the individual, so for themselves, and we have done surveys on this, and people still always think about themselves first, and then everything else is a bonus. So they'll be thinking about, right, how does this work for me? Then how does the house work? Like, who am I going to be living with? Is it actually going to work for me? And then I think the benefits of this kind of decentralized model of co-living, which is what we operate and what we're focusing on, I think works really well when you've got lots of small communities, but you can bring them all together.
Absolutely.
And I know you've written a couple of articles on this and how and some of the issues around it, because obviously there's a scaling issue with doing multiple small scale projects or properties, and there's obviously a scaling issue with managing a community of hundreds of properties in one location, but where it's not in one building.
Yeah, no, it's actually been fascinating, I guess, kind of looking at how you can create that community, right, or facilitate it, right. And I think one of the theories that's gaining some popularity, I think, in a lot of co-living circles, is looking at what's called the cluster model. And so the idea of this cluster model is that instead of having, like, let's say that you have 200 residents, right, and they're either centralized in one building, like I know the Collective over in the UK, or Common, Hamlet, a lot of these kind of bigger operators, they'll have the entire 200 people in one building, or you'll have 200 people spread out in 5-person share houses or like flats across the city, right. When you do have that, if I move into an apartment building with 199 other people, it will be impossible for me to just know all of their names, right? Like, I'm not going to have 199 best friends. It just isn't going to work, right? And so it's thinking about structuring the community not to where it's just, oh, hey, all 200 of us are in this together. That's not how humans form relationships, right? We have our close friends. We have maybe like our coworkers that are in a ring outside of that. And so the article that I wrote that you mentioned, I actually did kind of a bit of research looking at like the kind of social theory behind a lot of this. And one of the guys that's done an amazing job, his name's Robin Dunbar. He's actually a British anthropologist, and had a fascinating idea called the social mind theory. No, social brain theory is what it's called. And so Dunbar's number, which is the one he's most famous for, is 150. And so that theory is like looking at like literally the size of our brain. We can't keep more than 150 like meaningful like personal relationships, right? And this number 150, as he was looking back at history of all these like human organizations and tribes, and he kept finding this number pop up, which was wild. He looks at a lot of kind of like primitive tribe, like thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, and when they were kind of nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes, a lot of times, like once they would get to like from 150 to 200, they would actually split into two different tribes, right? So then this like 150 number kept popping up. And then he looked at like Roman armies and like how they were organized. It's like you have the company level, which is like 150 or so people. Then you have like 50, which is maybe different kind of sections, or and then within that you would have smaller units of like 5 or 10, right? So it's basically looking at all of these like human structures like through the years and seeing these kind of numbers pop up. And so his Dunbar's theory is that in our brain, the way we make relationships is kind of in these clusters, right? So maybe we have like our best friends in our family, maybe that's around 5 people, and then that's our super close ring, right? And then our second ring, our kind of middle ring, is maybe looking at coworkers or, other acquaintances, maybe people that you keep in touch with once a month or so. And maybe there's around, 15 or 20 people in that one. And then there's another ring that's around 50. And then there's this outer ring that is around 150 people that we can have meaningful relationships with, right? And so the kind of idea there and how that applies to co-living is saying, okay, let's structure that. Like if that's the psychology of the human mind, right? Then let's look at, maybe you have a flat, which is 5 people, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's the people within this co-living community that you're closest with, right? Then maybe you have 2 or 3 other houses that are within 2 or 3 blocks of you. The one that you mentioned where there was 2 houses that got to know each other well, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's kind of your middle ring. And then the entire city's community, maybe it's 200 people, whatever it is kind of that big outer ring that maybe every 3 months you have some kind of big kind of get together, right? But so I guess it's kind of thinking about this multi-tiered, like kind of clustering community approach that when you think about it, it matches with how we form relationships and how we maintain friendships, right? And so obviously easier said than done, trying to bring, this very abstract, kind of social or like human social theory to kind of a day-to-day kind of idea. But I think if you do look at the decentralized model of co-living, this kind of pops up. You'll have one like house that maybe has 5 or 6 people, and then you have the ones that are the neighbors, and then you'll have the entire city, right? And so thinking about that from an operator's perspective and how to help facilitate that in the best way possible, to have this like you mentioned, to have the you have the community, then you have the larger one, and then you have me, right? That's there at the center, right? So I think that as with a lot of your ideas, and I've just recently read one of the drafts of your book, I think that I'm totally on board. I think with how you think about a lot of this, and kind of saying, okay, you have the individual, then you have the smaller community that you're in, and then you have the entire one, right? So absolutely fascinating stuff. But we'll be very excited to see Co-Home get off the ground and see exactly where it goes next year. So that's very, very exciting times.
Oh no, definitely, and I'm kind of also excited to learn about some of these, because I like overcoming challenges. I like seeing problems and how we can overcome them as a group as well. Because as I said, community is a huge thing for me, and this new venture is all about a community of people coming together to solve this problem. And one thing which is obviously we're constantly trying to work out is how it works financially. And I know this is something that we've discussed before, and how on earth does, what are the financial benefits to the business of this type of living? Is it worth it? It is a question I often get asked by investors, saying, oh, why wouldn't I just build a block of flats, or why wouldn't I just just rent it out to a family, and why bother turning it into a shared house? And sometimes they've got a fair point. And there are definitely some houses which are much better off being let to families rather than spending lots of money on them, converting them. Because I think to do co-living well on the decentralized model, you don't have the same economy of scale. So when you look at providers like the Collective, and we use that one, obviously it was a UK-based example in London. The Collective, I interviewed them for James Penfold. I interviewed for the book, and took a few snippets from what he said. But he was saying that they wouldn't go beyond or below 200 as a number for making it worth their while, because of the operating costs. So at 200, I assume that's the lowest profit margin that they're able to make to provide the service that they want to provide. And then everything kind of beyond that they can scale up, but so they can get more and more profitability. And part of me thinks, if you're making a 200 room co-living, what's the difference really between a 200 room co-living and a 500 room co-living? Because you're already at this massive scale. True. with that same problem. So a 500 is just 2.5 times a 200. So you just because we know that the small scale of community is where community works. And your article about small gatherings talked about how people worked in meetings. So it was Jeff Bezos says that if you've got 2 pizzas, if you can't feed your whole meeting with 2 pizzas and you've got too many people in it, And I can't remember who else said it, but it said no double digits, so 9 and below. And I'd kind of have that same approach to shared housing at the decentralized model, because we know that people can form meaningful relationships, probably up to that 5, 10. Anything beyond that, it's just hard to maintain that relationship in your head. So, and also on the shared living survey that we did, and that also revealed that tenants don't like to share facilities with more than 3 or 4 other people.
Right.
So that would kind of come to the same conclusion, that 5 is probably a really good number. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't. So, for example, we have kind of 10 beds, we have 22 bedroom properties, and it doesn't mean that they don't work. But again, you've got that scale issue of, you've got a large number of people in one building. How do you then facilitate it? I think it's all about the design. So where you have multiple breakout spaces, multiple kitchens, that type of stuff. So in our 21 bedroom, there are 7 breakout spaces. So to divide it into 6 individual breakout spaces. So it's about,
one every 3 or 4 people. Yeah,
one every 3 or 4 people. And I think if you're designing, then especially if you're looking at new projects, that's definitely a way to do it. But yeah, it's just, I think with the funding, you're going to do 20 small projects. Is that going to be more cost effective than doing one mega project? How do you fund them? Can you get funding? I said for the larger co-living developments, that's where kind of venture capital money is going. As you're looking at that, I'd probably be interested to know what your thoughts are on that. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Matt, as far as looking at, when you do have that smaller, numbers as far as people, you do, or at least from what I've seen, you do tend to get a more organic community, right? So there's this big dilemma that I think exists in co-living, kind of looking at great community versus great scalability, right? So as kind of the collective mentioned, and I know there's a lot of other operators that kind of see eye to eye on this. It's kind of saying, okay, we can harness the power of economies of scale. So if you have 50 residents in a building or 100, you could say that, okay, maybe one community facilitator potentially would be able to do both of those jobs, right? Kind of looking at, okay, whether you have 50 or 100, but when you have 100, you have 100 residents that are paying for that, right? And so you're able to split these kind of fixed costs across a larger pool of like residents or tenants. And so that's why, upwards of 200 or other kind of things, all of those operating costs that are going to be more or less the same no matter how many people you have, the profit margins, and it obviously starts to make a lot more sense when you do have the big scale, right? Having said that, on the other side of the dilemma is basically all of the different co-living places that I've been to, the ones that have the smaller number of people, I have felt way more of a connection almost immediately walking in, right? Mm-hmm. So I walked into, there was one co-living place. Unfortunately, it's not around anymore, but it was called Hustler's Villa in Bali, and it was all about like people doing startups or other kind of things, hustling or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, and there was like a pool out back. There was like 6 or 7 like bedrooms, and so like when I was there, I got to know the people so well because we spent a lot of time together. And when you only have 6 people in the house, like you have to go and chat with those folks, right? Having said that, it can be more difficult to scale those models, right? So that's why I think it's Star City that they actually have plans for. I think it's like a bit over 800 people that are going to be at this location in San Jose. Massive building. Yeah, absolutely huge, right? It's all going to be co-living, which is exciting. But I think when you start to get to that size and you're looking at a lot of the numbers, the economies of scale really start to kick in and make a lot of sense as far as being able to scale that idea, right? So yeah, and again, I think like part of solving that dilemma can be design, just as you mentioned, right? So designing the space with 22 or 200 or 800, right? But designing it to where you do create these little clusters, right? You have your unit and then maybe there's 4 or 5 other units. So basically in this building of 500 people or 800 people, you still feel as though you're in this kind of smaller community, maybe of 20 or 30, and then in your unit, maybe 5 or 6, right? And so I think being able to hopefully, harness the fantastic advantages of living in a close community by having those kind of smaller clusters, but then also having the economies of scale by having the kind of massive buildings. And I think that there's definitely room for both decentralized and centralized co-living. I think they certainly both have their perks. They both have, kind of one I think maybe can facilitate better community more organically, and then the other one I think you can scale faster. The trick is being able to hopefully harness both of those. And I think from what I've seen from HMO platform and honestly some other co-living operators as well, they're really trying to deliberately get the community part right first, and then kind of say, okay, now let's copy and paste this idea to all, kind of like a bigger kind of platform, right? Which sounds like what you guys are doing with co-home. And so I think being able to get the community part right, understand your learnings, all the mistakes that I'm sure you made along the way, right? And being like, okay, let's not do that again. And then applying that to kind of a bigger scale, I think is an awesome way to do it. And yeah, hopefully at some point we'll get, a lot of different co-living operators that have really cracked the code, I guess, as far as being able to scale and provide great community. Haven't seen like a market leader number one, oh, they've really got it yet. But that's the exciting thing about co-living, right? It's like we're trying different models, we're trying different things, seeing who lives together well, how many people, and then kind of going from there. So, but yeah, I guess, hopefully if we're having this discussion in 2030, 10 years from now, we'll be like, okay, we all figured it out. Now we're good to go, right? But who knows?
Yeah, now what's next?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. No, I agree. It is a hard challenge. But one thing, as the HMO platform in particular is a coaching and facilitation for developers and investors who are looking to kind of get into more of the co-living and maybe turn existing portfolios into co-living, or and maybe they're starting out in HMOs and want to kind of future-proof it to make sure that they're not going to die a death the way of the traditional HMO. So there's going to be more of these smaller, sprawling co-living properties than there are going to be of the kind of serviced co-living, is what I kind of like to call it, that hotel like style, massive one, where you have more of a service. Obviously you've got a maid going in, you've got a restaurant on site, so that type of stuff, which you cannot provide at the small scale. It just doesn't make sense. You'll have a cleaner going around, and you could potentially have a turn down service in your home, in your house. But I think we will see more of the smaller scale stuff than the larger scale stuff, and I think that's where the challenge is to be overcome. Because if we can overcome that challenge on the small scale, financially as well as logistically, and create community, I think there's a lot of towns around the UK that we can have a positive impact on through this type of shared living, but also a lot of investors who will benefit from it and benefit from having better tenants. Because something else that I'm really intrigued to find out more about, probably over the coming year or two, is how different types of tenants, people who've been used to living in HMOs and shared houses, how they relate to co-living. Because the interesting thing is, tenants don't necessarily know that co-living is an option.
Right.
Yeah. So if you look at certain towns like London and Brighton, most people will go onto just Google room for rent, and that whatever comes up, it'll be probably Spare Room, Gumtree, all these other websites, and they'll see that they can go and they can get a room to rent, and that they just don't know the options are out there. So I think there's all, but if they knew the option, they'd be like, wow, that's amazing. And they becomes a choice. So I think one of the main objectives for the next kind of 2 to 3 years is actually customer awareness and brand awareness. So actually, one of our goals is to ensure that that people choose co-living and choose our brand of co-living rather than directly just looking for a room to rent. So they go, I want to live in this shared home because they've got a reputation. And one thing that I think would be amazing, like any other business, your best form of advertising is happy customers telling other potential customers that if you want to have a really great time in your, well, I'm going to say in your 20s, then move into one of these properties, move into this brand or this brand of shared house, and co-living is a choice, and that they choose to live in for 10 years because maybe buying or is becoming more unaffordable, maybe renting independent accommodation is maybe less affordable, but also maybe they might one of my goals be that they choose shared accommodation over independent living because they have a better quality of life. I think that would be an amazing goal to see that happening.
No, totally. I would completely 100% agree that I think education and awareness is a massive thing that I think, hopefully over the next, 5 to 10 years, people will understand it and be like, okay, this is a win for everybody. And that's something that I want to touch on as well, I guess, kind of going back to like a bit of the kind of financial piece too, like looking into co-living from basically any angle. And I think probably on this call, maybe we're a little biased, but I really do think it's a win-win-win for basically everybody involved. Obviously, you look at the tenant, right? The tenant is getting a much better living experience, right? As far as, okay, I'm in this space. It's been designed specifically for folks that want something out of their living experience like me. And then you're living around other people that you can have some kind of community, right? Then you look at the investors and or the operators. And so I guess like one of the like central kind of financial pillars of co-living is that you can get an increase in your NOI, right? Your net operating income. And so what that comes through is like being able to, I guess, kind of rent out the rooms one by one instead of renting out an entire unit. So renting out the bedrooms, you're actually, and I'm sure you know this quite well, Matt, but I think you're actually able to get more revenue in. And then as well, some of the co-living players have kind of denser living design, right? So maybe, if there's 10,000 square meters, I'm making up numbers, 10,000 square meters, you can fit in 100 people. For co-living, in the same amount of square meters, you could fit in 120 or whatever it might be, right? And so then also being able to rent out the rooms one by one, you're actually able to get a higher revenue, right? And then maybe your operating expenses are a bit higher just because you're providing these services and these events, and it's more.
They're actually it's a lot higher than if you were to rent them. Mainly because if you rent a house as a whole unit, the occupiers would then take on all of the operating expenses, bar things like buildings insurance. And compliance with legislation, etc. Whereas in a shared accommodation, you then on the whole, you take on all of those running costs,
the utilities and
so it wouldn't be uncommon to see 15 to 20% of your gross income going on operating expenses.
Totally fair. Yeah. But then I guess kind of the like where the sweet spot lies, right, is being able to increase the revenue relatively by more than you would be increasing the operating expenses, right? And so
massively,
and so I think like that's where a lot of these kind of more traditional real estate players, whether it's small landlords or it's kind of big institutional real estate investment firms or whatever you want to call them. They're starting to kind of wake up to that, right? And say, okay, wait a minute, maybe there's something here in this model that not only is going to be great for the people that are actually living there, and I also believe the community in which they exist, but then also looking at, okay, this can actually provide higher returns for us, right? And so I think like, from 2015 to today has kind of been like this, like proving out the model. And I think a lot of co-living operators have said, no, look, this does work. Look how high our occupancy rates are. Look how high our customer satisfaction is. Also, as a bonus, we're actually bringing in, more revenue and hopefully more net income there to kind of make the developers excited, make the investors excited, make the operators. And so I think hopefully kind of looking at what co-living can do there, hopefully a lot of, either bigger real estate, kind of firms or more people will start waking up to the fact that, wow, this can, making more money. I can contribute more like impact wise to hopefully people living better lives. So it really is something that I think across the board can start to be something that once people are more aware and once people are educated that this is out there, really just starts to be a home run across the board. So we shall see. But yeah, I know a lot of what I mentioned you have gone in and tinkered with and all the numbers and the business model over the years. But I think that, kind of after having years of experience under your belt, it sounds like, pretty good model moving forward potentially. So.
Oh no, definitely, and that's the reason why I started in HMOs, was because of you can get more out of one building than if you just rented it as a house. And I think there's lots of um, buildings which are, I'm talking UK wise here, but there's lots of buildings which are in this kind of middle bracket, as in they're maybe too big to be a family home. And therefore maybe more expensive. So traditionally, if you look at, so take London as an example, where property prices have just skyrocketed over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and you're seeing people being pushed out into more of the suburbs. And so if you take one suburb, which is Croydon, which is in East London, Croydon has got quite a lot of large houses, but the prices again becoming too high, so that actually these large assets are no longer viable as family homes. So what you see is developers coming in and splitting them into flats.
Got
So
it.
so an alternative to flats would be co-living. So in areas like that, taking these larger buildings and dividing them up into shared living, I think is actually a positive. And one thing that I am kind of looking to lobby and to kind of work with councils to see that actually this is a good form of development, because normally you go to a council and you say, I want to do an HMO, and they go, no, we don't want you in our town. Yes, off you go, thank you very much. Whereas actually if you rephrase it, and we started to see this happening in London, in Brighton, in Manchester, you rephrase the application from HMO to co-living, then they start to look very differently on what you're providing. But they're also going to start to look at you as the operator. But I think when it comes to the scale of the project, there's a lot of opportunities where these buildings are maybe underutilized, maybe commercial buildings, offices, shops which are no longer viable.
Right.
Lots of town centres have got a lot of retail which is not being used, so it's sitting empty. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of repurpose. And what I'd like to see is a lot of these towns, bringing in a co-living, co-working model into the town centres. It brings life and vibrancy back. I live in a town called Worthing, and I've seen a couple of developments around here going that way, which gives me hope that that's possible, and it's something we'd love to be able to we be getting into, or will be getting into as well, in this town and others. So what my concern is that then there'll be other developers who don't do it right, and could turn it the other way around. So I think the more that we can demonstrate that this is a good way of doing things, like I'm getting inquiries from developers who literally are just thinking about the bottom line, going, actually, I think I maybe should do this. Maybe if I thought about the customer, my bottom line would be higher. So
Crazy idea.
well, exactly. So working with people like us and others that champion co-living and that you can show you how to do it well, I think really can benefit the investor, as you say, for a win. It can benefit the occupier, the tenant, for a win, and then the other win. What was your third win?
So just looking at operator as well, right? So like
the operator, yeah,
kind of investor, yeah.
yeah, exactly. I suppose we're different because we cover operator and investor.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like why limit it to 3 wins, right? If I think if you look at the like overall city or the community or the neighbors or the local businesses that are going to be supported, right? It's like they're if done correctly, and I think that's a good point you made, right? I think there's going to be some operators that will do it correctly, and some will try to kind of jump on the train and maybe have some kind of living product that is not up to the kind of standards that we would like to see, as far as great community, great amenities, all the kind of things that good co-living comes with. But yeah, hopefully if it's executed correctly, it can be really a win for everybody. And I think that's actually one thing I'd like to touch on as well, is looking at, so there's one is educating and making the customers more aware, but the other one is making like local municipalities or city governments or local government officials, right? And saying, hey, this is not the typical, crazy party house, whatever you want to call it, right? Of just like young people. But this is co-living. These are folks coming in that want to live a more purposeful, intentional, community-driven lifestyle. But in order for those permits to get approved, in order to actually get, the kind of right tax incentives or whatever you want to call it, you do have to go and knock on the door, right? There's a developer in in New Orleans who was building a co-living place down there, and he said it like took him 6 months. Like he was going to the mayor's office, just like, hey, this is co-living, and at first they were like, what are you talking about? Like, get out, right? The next month came back with another slide deck or whatever it is, right? And I think educating and saying, no, this is something different. This is something that will be good for everybody across the board. It might bring some more like vibrancy and more life to an area that maybe has some retail shops out of business or whatever it is, right? And so, but you do have to educate because it is something new, it's something innovative, and people, for better or for worse, they're kind of no, I'm comfortable building these type of buildings, and you come in and say, oh, co-living, look at this. But I think when it comes down to it, educating and making the like local government officials more aware is a huge piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and that's quite often where people fall down. It's and also I can understand why councils can be skeptical, because they can, once the application has been approved, they've got very little way or very few ways of enforcing it. So you've got people who come in who will say we'll sell them the earth and then actually not deliver on it. They'll
Right.
change their minds and they'll do things, and they'll So I think I think the proof is in the pudding. My view is prove it. Work within the rules that we have. We get things up and running. We show them what's happening. We show them the benefit to the tenants. We get the testimonials. We get local businesses, all that those kind of people to champion this as an example, because you've also got, for example, a lot of people when they're converting houses to HMOs, if you're doing a larger one, and in some areas you have to get planning permission on any HMO, it means that the neighbours can get their ear in, which means that you're going to have people, the neighbours complaining about the fact that this old family home is going to be converted and there's going to be 5 people or 6 people living in it when there used to just be a family, and it's going to be noisy, there's going to be parties, there's going to be no parking on the street anymore, and all of these. And I think a lot of the time it's just through bad education, but also you do get some people who are just particularly mean as well.
Not in my backyard crowd, right?
Yeah, NIMBYs. Exactly. So would I want an HMO next to me? It's a very good question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, like as we kind of see it move along, I would agree with you as well, kind of saying, okay, let's get out there, let's measure it, let's see what's going on. There's an operator here in the US. It's actually started out of Israel, but it's called VENN, VENN. And I was able to meet with some of the team when I was in Brooklyn for a while, and I think the one of the biggest takeaways from them was they're measuring all of their positive impacts. So every 6 months they release what they call an impact report, and they say all of our residents took a survey when they first came in, and they said, like, do you feel lonely? Like, do you feel connected to the community? And then like 6 months later they give them like another survey. And then as well, they also measure the companies in the area or the businesses that they have supported, or how like loneliness, how that's impacted by folks living and co-living. And so I think hopefully as we start to get a lot of co-living operators measuring all of these amazing things that co-living can do, then we'll be able to go with our clipboards into the offices and say, no,
look at this. Yeah,
exactly, right. And say like, no, look, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like we did it under these circumstances and we were able to have success. It was great for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Now we want to do it in a more purposeful way. And we need the city or the local government to kind of be on board with this. Right. And like any change, it's going to take time. And like, sometimes it's going to be frustrating. And sometimes there'll be some operators that, give co-living kind of a bad rap for a while or whatever it is. And that's just going to happen. But I think as long as you have purposeful, operators and, folks like yourself at HMO Platform that are kind of doing it in the right way, measuring it in the right way, and being able to, show that this is a viable, vibrant living model for people in the 21st century, that we will eventually get across that line and be able to bring in our clipboards with all the notes and everything else. And really, hopefully make this a very kind of mainstream, viable living model for more and more folks every year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when people say that it's a small market, I would massively disagree, saying it's a growing market, for sure. And there's millions of people around the world, or billions of people around the
Probably
world
billions. Yep.
that actually fit into potential of this type of living, and it doesn't need to be confined to the young professional, between the ages of 20 and 35, which is generally the target market. It's where we operate. We operate with there. We operate in students. Though that's the type of, or the time of life that you mostly find people looking for community within. With them, because they're less settled, and they become settled in these communities, but then their goal would be probably to move out into their own independent accommodation when they get families, they couple up, and so I see there's almost like a secondary market in the kind of older generations, those kind of beyond 40, 50, and even into the retirement community. If you think about once kids have left home, once people have they're looking for something else again. I often have conversations with people saying that there's a huge market for those over 55 who we want to start engaging in community, and we're not talking care homes. That's
Right.
yeah. I think in the olden days, whenever they were, care homes, people moving to care homes at the age of 60, 65 when they retire, maybe a little bit later. But now, care homes and nursing homes, that's, as generations are getting older, there is this kind of, there's almost like there's a gap in the market that's opening up in a
Totally.
way, because people are maybe they've had the huge family home, they don't really know what to do with it, maybe they want to downsize, the money's less important, they prefer to, I don't know, sell, maybe invest their money elsewhere and actually live in a community, and owning their own home that they live in is maybe less of a concern, because as from our side as investors, owning your own home is something which is great, but I still rent, and the homes that I own are just lived in by other people.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think as well, we'll certainly start to see different kind of models pop up, exactly like you said, as far as, okay, this kind of co-living makes sense for this age demographic, right?
Yeah.
And then this kind of co-living makes sense for, maybe that in between age, after kids, pre, some kind of like care home or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, right? And then as well, there's family co-living popping up. Common is doing this concept called kin, that I think hopefully we can see that model kind of evolve and say, okay, how can we redesign the urban family living experience, right? Not the suburban home where you have 2.5 kids, a dog, and a white picket fence or whatever, right? But how about families that are living in urban areas, right? And how can we create a better living solution around that, right? So, man, I mean, the sky is the limit as far as I think where shared living and co-living can go, and the different kind of demographics that they can that they can cater towards. But yeah, hopefully we will hopefully we'll be sitting here in 10, 15 years being like, wow, the co-living industry is now touching lives of millions and millions of people across the world, and
Yeah.
hopefully having people live more purposeful, more intentional lives.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to have this long, awesome, in-depth chat with yourself. And yeah, so thank you very much.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks so much, Matt, again, for the invite, for having me on here, and certainly best of luck into 2021 and beyond with Co-Home. Hopefully, at some point, maybe I can get over and be one of the co-homies. Who knows?
Yes, for sure. I'm really looking forward to having you as part of the team at the HMO platform as well, sharing your insights into co-living and what it means from your perspective as people do developments.
Certainly. Looking forward to it, Matt.
Cheers.
Awesome.